Now we want to add a second view to our utility app, My World. We're going to learn how to create a second view. One reason why it's easy to extend and enhance your iPhone app is the fact that the template that you use at the beginning sets you up to take advantage of delegation. You're using a behavior-rich object supplied by the framework as is, and you're putting the code for program-specific behavior in a separate object, which we call a delegate object. You're basically using delegation to get the framework objects to do the work for you. Government and military leaders know all about delegation. Ronald Reagan could have been talking about extending the functionality of apps and object-oriented programming when he said, "Surround yourself with the best people you can find, delegate authority, and don't interfere." And General George S. Patton seemed to know all about combining delegation with encapsulation to enhance applications when he said, "Never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity." When you combine delegation, encapsulation, and inheritance, changing or enhancing objects in your app or their functionality becomes much easier because it reduces the impact of those changes on the rest of your app. As I mentioned earlier, with encapsulation, you're hiding how things are being done from what is being done. You remember the idea is to keep your objects as ignorant as possible about the environment in which they work and the other objects they use. An object hides all the details of how it works while allowing other objects to use its methods. Encapsulation makes it easier to enhance and extend the object's capabilities without disturbing how other objects use it. Although some dependency always exists whenever one object uses another, you limit those dependencies to what other objects do rather than how they do it, and limit the number of objects each one uses. The example is that, people don't know how a computer works, but they can effectively browse the internet. And people who successfully drive cars have no idea how the engine works. And as Sergeant Schultz of Hogan's Heroes used to say, "I hear nothing, I see nothing, I know nothing." Encapsulation makes possible the ability to change how an object carries out its responsibilities or how it behaves without having to disturb the other code. It also makes possible the ability to add new responsibilities to an object, which is extensibility. One of the primary things that objects encapsulate is their data. And another thing they do transparently is add new objects, as you will see when we add our second view. So when you limit what your objects know about other objects in your app, changing objects or their functionality becomes much easier. Well, what makes this scenario work is the fact that with object-oriented programming, you can essentially copy all of the characteristics of an existing class to make a new class. The new class inherits the methods and data structure of the existing class. Inheritance is the reason why you can replace an old refrigerator with a new one that not only does the same thing, but does it better. The new refrigerator inherits all the basic capabilities of the old one and improves on them. At least you hope it does. Inheritance allows you to do a number of things that make your apps more extensible. In a subclass, you can add new methods and instance variables to what is inherited from a superclass, then refine or extend the behavior of an inherited method and change the behavior of an inherited method. Inheritance makes code more elegant and less repetitive. If we know that all shapes have color, for example, should we program a color attribute for each shape? No, it'd be a better idea to create a shape class that has a color attribute to make all the specialized shapes inherit the color attribute. Inheritance simplifies your code, and you end up with a program that's a great deal easier to understand and extend. It allows you to do a number of things that make your programs more extensible and enhanceable. You can add new methods and instance variables, which is one of the most common reasons for defining a subclass. You can refine or extend the behavior of a method. You do this by adding a new version of the same method while you still continue to use the code in the old method. It's simple. You add a new version, you implement a new method with the same name as the one that's inherited. The new version overrides the inherited version. And in the body of the new method, you send a message to execute the inherited version. Another important thing you can do is you can change the behavior of a method you inherit. You do this by replacing an existing method with a new version and by overriding the old method, as I just talked about. But in this case, however, you don't send a message to execute the inherited version. The old implementation is still used for the other classes and the class that defined it, but your classes and classes that inherit from the new class that you make can use your implementation. Changing behavior is not unusual, although it does make your code harder to follow. If you find yourself frequently overriding a method to completely change its behavior, you should question your design. So what do you do when you combine inheritance and encapsulation? You get polymorphism, using objects that do the same thing in different ways. Polymorphism is about cultivating more of the same. Your friend's refrigerator is not the same as yours, but you know how to open it and find the beer. Different refrigerator models offer different features, but they operate the same way. So as I mentioned before, this feature in object-oriented languages makes it possible to add new objects of the same type and have your app handle them without making any changes to the code that uses them. And you can think of it another way. The capability of different objects to respond, each in its own way, to identical messages. That's polymorphism. You see, while encapsulation allows you to ignore how things are done, polymorphism allows you to escape the specific details of differences between objects that do the same things in different ways. In a program, different objects might perform the same methods in different ways. If the user spends cash, a cash transaction object subtracts that amount from the user's budget. But if the user uses a credit card transaction will first have to convert the amount into some other currency, etc., 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 and then subtract it from the budget. Either way, they perform differently to the same message, which is that you've spent some money and you need to subtract it from the budget. Now, because we use encapsulation to hide the details of our main view controller and what it does, we can add another controller very simply using polymorphism. And what we're going to do is we're going to enhance the My World app to show photos or images from the photo library on the second view. And we'll use instances of the same object, the main view controller, along with inherited methods of a superclass to implement a second view next to the first view so that the user can scroll horizontally between them. And because we've encapsulated the details of how to set the falling words in the first view and what will be the falling image or photo in the second view, and of course how to save preferences and how to show info from the main screen to select new preferences, well, it'll be a piece of cake to add a second view. So what do we need to do to add a second view? Well, to use instances of the same controller to control other views, we need to first define a number of views, or we think of them as pages. We need to have a key in the constants.h file, which is right here in our My World project. We need to add it here, and I'll tell you why as we add it. We're going to define k number of pages 2, and then we're going to save. Choose File, Save to save that constants. So now we've added the number of pages to our constants.h file. So the game plan is to initialize 2 instances of main view controller. We already have one, which is underscore main view controller. And we're going to add the second one, which is photo view controller. And we're going to set up the ability to scroll horizontally, that is, swipe to the left or right, in order to switch views.